Alright, since you guys seem to love this video, and a lot of you asked for this, here it is. This is the behind the scenes of Movie Sonic vs Metal Sonic. I'm gonna be honest, I don't tend to do the best job at planning. I just kind of get a rough idea and start jotting any plans down on my phone, and go from there. So, after I watched Sonic 3 and I screamed at the post-credit scene, I got the models for Sonic, Metal Sonic, city assets, and got to work. So the only things that I truly planned in advance for this were a few shots in the city area, and that Sonic would use his warp rings to try and evade and ultimately defeat Metal Sonic. But aside from that, I basically went in blind. There's really only a handful of projects that I have meticulously planned out. But before we actually get to the animation, quickly, I want to go over my process for some of the shaders in the animation. I'm only going to focus on a couple. I'm going to focus on Metal Sonic for now though, whose model is literally just his Forces one. But those textures, I mean, it's alright. But we can make these better very quickly. I found this tutorial on YouTube, how to make realistic metal shader in Blender. Did I follow this? No. But they had some good textures to work with in the description. Alright, don't be alarmed, this looks a lot more complicated than it actually is. So those textures I was on about, I only used a few of them. I think the pack comes with a lot more, but I only used... In fact, I've got 3 here, but I think I only used rough paint and scratch. So as you can see up here, I used the scratched texture and I mixed it in with metal's normal diffuse texture, and that is mixed with the scratch metal texture, which I don't believe was part of that pack. I believe I just found this on Google Images. So I'm not going to be too technical when I explain this, so just for very simple understanding, the way that these textures in this pack work is basically use them to map where other textures will show up. So in values, basically anything white has a value of 1, anything black has a value of 0, and then it shows other textures underneath that accordingly. So anything white, it will show the scratch, and anything black on this texture, it will show the diffuse. But the way that I've done it with the color ramp, I've made it really subtle, so you can only just see like these little scratches. So if I was to like move this black all the way, then you can see a lot more of the scratches, but I didn't really want them to be too obvious. I feel like it looks it's a little bit unrealistic when it's like super obvious like that. And with this rough paint texture, I mapped it into Metal Sonic's roughness value, and then I also used a noise texture just to give it like that extra amount of randomness, just so it doesn't look too uniform, otherwise it doesn't look realistic at all. It kind of needs like that kind of random natural element. The rest of these textures that you can see here are basically just textures that Metal Sonic comes with, his diffuse, his specular, and his bump map, which very simply the bump map basically allows light to reflect in places where it wouldn't otherwise. So for example, like you can use it to give the illusion of little grooves or bumps on the model without actually having it physically there. And this fire shader I cooked up is really versatile as well. I used it here, and I used it for Metal's jets as well. The shader has evolved a lot. It started from just a random test animation with Kiryu from Yakuza, but I kept changing it the more I used it, and now it looks really nice. So you might be asking yourself, James, why do you not want to simulate fire so badly? Well, it's because, especially in this scenario when I've simply got it as a background element, mostly, you can't really tell. And to be honest, to the untrained eye, like it looks fine. And as you can see, the layout's actually not too complicated. Basically, it's just 2 principled volumes. This top one here is just to give it a little bit more color, and this bottom one is to give it the glow. And all of this is driven by a Yakuza texture, which won't show. Alright, here it is. So this is from like that original Yakuza test animation I was on about. So I wanted the fire then to show up in a shape like a dragon. So I used the dragon style icon from Gaiden as a base to basically drive the shape of the volume. But then I found out if I just use a noise texture, it looks just like convincing normal fire anyway. I imagine this would work with like most textures that are similar to this. So it was an accidental find, but it works quite nicely. And also, while we're on it, I'll go over this little like heat distortion, which I have going on here, which you can't really see while I'm in rendered view. You can see it here. This is also a fairly simple layout. It's using a refraction BSDF just to kind of make it, basically it's like a pane of glass, more or less, that's just distorting the light behind it. And there's a noise texture plugged into this that's basically there to give it this distortion, and I've got this mapping node set to constantly go up in the X value of the location, so it's always moving. And I feel like in the actual animation it shows up a little bit faster than I'd like, but I didn't want to re-render this whole bit just to get this done again. Alright, so now we can get to the fun stuff. So my initial plan was just to have this be just a normal race that would gradually get more and more violent, but obviously Metal Sonic wouldn't just not attack Sonic, so he changes this very quickly. Also, I set this scene up to be similar to what I would imagine it to be in the movies, showing that events have happened prior to this and we're just kind of thrust into the action midway through. There are two main areas for the city portion of this. A shorter street that's a little bit wider, and a very long one. To make animating this half easier too, I parented all of the city assets to a singular empty, so that I can move them all at once instead of having to move the characters all the way across. This means that animating everything is a little bit easier and the camera can be a little bit smoother and everything just kind of flows a bit nicer instead of having to move everything except for the set. It also means the lighting can be a little bit more consistent since there's not going to be a million different light sources and it's all just kind of, it's the same like 2-3 lights. Doing all this means the wall running sequence that I planned was a little bit simpler to put together because I can just move the set around instead of having to move Sonic up and down it and across it at the same time. Also, this means for the second half of this section, I imagine some of you noticed it, I literally just moved the empty back to its original spot so they had the whole street to run down again, so it makes it appear a little bit longer and a little bit bigger. Also, fun fact, these speed lines that appear twice in the video are actually just a shader on a cylinder that surrounds metal. Now let's move on to the construction area. Now if it wasn't obvious already from the city area, these are all repurposed Radical Highway assets from Shadow Generations. Now this scene posed a few challenges for me since now it would be a lot more combat focused rather than speed. Fight animations are something that I've been notoriously bad at until kind of recently. I was really happy with the beginning of this section with how they both exit the ring though. But did you guys know that this section is contained all within a big donut? You see these clouds that surround the area and cover a few buildings? It's actually a big donut shaped volume. Here's a quick look at the nodes for this as well. Now let's get back to the action. I do a lot of funny business to get this all looking good. For example, did you notice that when Metal lunges at Sonic, he actually travels a lot further than he physically could have in the previous shot? This is a trick I do a lot. I imagine a lot of people are going to notice this when I do it now that I've pointed it out, but I do this a lot to make big fast movements more dramatic and also a bit easier to see. I also use it to cheat a lot of movements so I can make it a little bit easier for myself. I mean, just look how much these guys teleport around between shots. I also do this so that if I have characters in a complicated pose and I want to change them back and have it a bit easier to pose them again, I can use this kind of angle cheating to change the pose a little bit or alter it so it looks a little bit nicer. I'm going to be honest, the Mushroom Planet scene right at the end was a really late addition. I made this whole bit in like the span of about 2 hours. The environment just consists of spears and mushrooms spammed all over the place, but it's simple but effective. God, this is probably the worst part of animating. Despite the fact that it turns my computer into a collapsed sun, it's also annoying and a lot of errors tend to come out of this process, meaning you waste a lot more time re-rendering stuff. Especially if that happens during an overnight render and you can't do anything about it because you're sleeping a lot because you chose the job where deprivation is a requirement. Anyway, the render took in total about 5 days, give or take. Each frame took on average 1 minute and 30 seconds to render, meaning it took a minimum of 110 hours to render the entire animation. It is definitely more than that, but I'm simply going by averages. I did half of my compositing process in Blender, using the compositing nodes to help denoise and add some glowing to my frames. In Premiere I did some minor color correction and then added all of my audio and sound effects. I mean, what is that? And finally in After Effects I added some smoke to the shot where Metal slams Sonic against the buildings, as well as adding a slight gradient to the shot where I referenced the CD box art. And that's pretty much it. This animation was a lot of fun to make, but also kind of annoying depending on whatever way you look at it, but you all loved it, and in the end that makes it all worth it. If there's anything that I missed in this video that you'd like me to show, let me know. I might make a short out of it. Also, let me know if you guys like this style of video and I may do it again for other projects, new or old. Thank you for watching this far in, it means a ton. That's all I gotta say anyway, so I'll see you all later.